Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was a gamer between dimensions. When a boy wakes up in the world of Naruto with no memory of the past, foggy memories of the future, and a convenient gamer-like ability, so what's he to do? The only option is to get stronger and move forward. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel, and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard. Chapter 12. It's been quiet for a while, anything on your end? My teacher asked me as I appeared in front of her. I shook my head in the negative, nothing has happened on my end either. My teacher nodded her head before saying, "Alright, just make sure you keep your eyes peeled, I have a feeling that things won't stay quiet for long." I nodded my head in agreement. It had been a little over a week since we had begun this mission, and while there had been a few skirmishes here and there with rogue groups and bandits, there hadn't been any attacks from any of the 5 great villages as of yet. But like everything, it'll only be a matter of time. This wasn't even me jinxing it, as I knew that Kirigakure wouldn't take their earlier loss sitting down. We had beaten their previous scouts, and so it was only a matter of time before they retaliated. I had a feeling that they were just waiting for something. The question was what? "Comrades from the Leaf." A voice yelled out, causing me and my teacher to look towards the speaker. The individual donned the Tsuchigumo headband and stopped in front of us before giving us a short bow. "Please take a break, my team is ready to take watch." I looked up into the sky, noting that it was a little past afternoon, before hearing my teacher say, "We haven't sensed anything out of the ordinary so far, but be on your guard." "Of course, ma'am," the man said, and body flickered from view. With a nod in my direction, Dev disappeared from view, and I followed after her. Healing most of their injured shinobi really made things much easier on us, Koto said as she placed her mask on the couch of our residence and took off her flak jacket. I followed suit with a nod. They seemed to hold less animosity towards us as well. She smiled and patted my head. "Well, it's all thanks to you." She then stopped and looked out the window before saying, "It's getting late, and the others should be back soon. I'll head out to get us something to eat." "You want anything specific?" I thought for a moment before replying, "Takoyaki." There was a smirk on her face as she waved me goodbye. "Alright then, kiddo, I'll be back in a sec." And with that, she disappeared from view, leaving me alone on the couch. I stretched out my limbs a little before opening my status menu and looking through it. I hummed and thought for a moment as I contemplated something before thinking to myself, make my hidden attributes visible along with my visible attributes when I open my status. Would you like these settings saved? Y/N. I mentally clicked Y and instantly, my status changed to reflect my decision. Name, Yorodon. Race, human. Level, LVL 58. Next level, 146. 775/165, 400. HP, 32333/32333 Regen, 646.6 per min. CP, 79101/79101 Regen, 2135.7 per min. CC, 97%. STR, 252.0. VIT, 264.6. Dex, 216.3. Int, 331.8. WIS, 326.4. NG, 592.1. Points, 384. Rio, 875,348. Hidden attributes. T, 7C. P, DMG. STRXDEX 0.4. E, DMG. %NG. S, DMG. %int. AP. Highest damage output, 144,000. SPD. Traveling, supersonic. Reaction, high hypersonic. LS. 850,000 kilograms. SS. Damage, 5,720. Dir. Negate 2035 DMG. Negate damage equal to VIT asterisk LVL, carat 0.352. Iron body. Increase DUR by 25%. Chakra reinforcement. Increase DUR by 25%. Dense muscle. Negate damage equal to STR, 252. Note, added onto base DUR. I had slightly improved my stats in the past week, but it wasn't really anything noteworthy. Other than that, since I now knew more about my functions, and that I could freely control and manipulate the display, I decided that seeing my hidden stats would give me a better gauge of my strength and skill. With that all set, I laid down on the couch, and got comfortable as I went into my meditative position and closed my eyes. I synchronized the rate of my breathing with my heartbeat, and relaxed on the couch for a moment. As I sunk deeper into my subconscious, I suddenly felt something jump onto my chest. I peeled open my eyes and looked at my chest to see a red toad standing there quietly. It seemed to be wearing an obi, but I might have just been misidentifying it. We stared at each other for a while before I ignored it as my empathy picked up no malice from the creature. I then turned my gaze up toward the ceiling wondering when Kodo and the rest would be back. I want some takoyaki. Oi, don't ignore me. I blinked and turned back towards the toad who had spoken. If you had said something earlier, I wouldn't have. The toad put on a thoughtful expression, fair enough. It then began to extend upwards from the waist, allowing me to realize that it hadn't been wearing an obi or anything, but that those bands around its stomach had been like a cap to a bottle or something. I didn't think much further as the toad's abdomen revealed a scroll in its extended midsection. The toad unfurled the scroll, allowing me to see what was written within. I hummed for a moment as I read through it, and it could basically be summed up as, "Hey kid, the guy you wanted me to tail has been moving suspiciously the last few days according to my toads, so I would keep an eye on him. On another note, my sources have gathered intel on some movement from the hidden mist, so be on your guard. Jiraiya." I'll let the others know. I thought before looking at the rest of the information on the scroll and realizing that the remaining space on the scroll seemed to contain a reverse summoning formula. Odd. I thought before inwardly shaking my head and looking at the toad, thank you for that. The toad nodded its head before rolling the scroll back into itself, and retracting itself down to its previous size. I looked to it in curiosity. I know about summons, but I have never heard of something like you. The amphibian crossed its arms before floating. I'm a rare breed of toad called as a messenger toad. I have similar anatomy to scroll toads, but the space on my body's scroll is much smaller, and so I am usually used to deliver short messages, unlike scroll toads who usually deliver highly confidential documents. I nodded my head at the information. Neat. The messenger toad smiled with its arms crossed as it continued to remain afloat and looked at me. I raised a brow. What's wrong? Is there anything else? It paused at that before sighing. Yeah, I'm going to need you to open wide. What? The toad sighed once more. Look, I would rather not do this, but I have orders. Don't worry, I'm small enough that it won't be a hassle. I had an odd premonition, but I opened my mouth regardless. The toad immediately flew into my mouth before I could react and slithered down my throat before disappearing. I blinked once, then twice, before my eye twitched and I sighed. Whatever. I thought before taking out a scroll, jotting down the information I had gotten from Jiraiya, and then tossing it in my inventory. I would just give the other guys this instead of explaining it to them. Next, I made a shadow clone and had it transform into a bug before having it crawl away. Gyoja was a Fuinjutsu master, and I already knew there had to be some seals around his residence, since my energy resonance couldn't penetrate it, something I had found out earlier this week. That being said, I had no doubt that there were traps around this village meant for catching trespassers. I would simply have my clone stay within a 2,700-meter radius of Shiranami's living area without getting too close. I already knew he lived in the upper-class residential area, and with my eidetic memory, I had easily memorized his chakra signature, so all my clone had to do was stay the maximum possible distance away while scouting for his chakra signature. This was the most I could do on my own, but at least I'd be able to monitor his movements, albeit in a limited range. With that, I laid back down on the couch and thought and wondered what else I could do for now before I decided to just play around with my skills a little bit. I sat up straight on the couch and clapped my hands together before concentrating my chakra and channeling its lightning nature into a compressed ball between my palms. I only put in a little bit so that I wouldn't blow up the place and opened my palms to witness a small blue ball of compressed electrical energy. Small sparks flew from the ball, and it bobbed up and down slightly as it floated on my palm. I poked the ball with my index finger and quickly felt a sharp sting from it, causing me to retract my finger. No mass though, makes sense since it's just energy. I thought as I lightly lobbed the ball of lightning up and down and played around with it. What else to do? I thought for a moment before coming up with something. I willed the ball of lightning to dissipate and took out an empty scroll from my inventory along with a brush and some ink. I laid the materials down on the table and closed my eyes before opening them once more, my hyper-focus activated. I took my brush and with alien levels of fluidity, began inscribing on the empty scroll. Each stroke was perfectly aligned with my intentions, each curve and dash coming together to create an intricate design. While my body seemed to move on its own, so too did my mind wander off elsewhere. Hyper-focus was essentially using meditation in conjunction with a non-combatant skill, but it could also be used to hone my focus to such an intense degree, I seemingly lost focus, hence hyper-focus. My mind replayed the images I had seen while I had been in my meditative position a week prior. The smoke. The fire. The destruction. My hands danced on the paper as the world around me seemed to fade out of existence, leaving only the paper and brush in front of me. Ninetales. And a lot of death. Eventually, even the concept of time seemed to disappear from my conscious mind as I single-mindedly focused on my calligraphy. I didn't know how long I was in my trance-like state, but eventually. Ping. Congratulations. Basic calligraphy has leveled up by 1. My senses returned back to my body in full and my gaze lost its intense focus as I regained my bearings. You mind if I take a look? A voice called out to me, causing me to blink. While in that state, I'm unaware of my surroundings. I thought before looking up to Kazumona and nodding my head. She picked up the scroll while commenting, "You were so focused that I didn't want to disturb you, but if I was an enemy, you would be dead." "Then I'm glad you're not." She smiled and turned her gaze back towards the scroll before stating, "You have a vivid imagination." She placed the scroll down, allowing me to see it as I hadn't regained enough of my focus earlier to actually note what I had drawn. I took in my drawing before commenting, "I suppose I do." The image depicted the Ninetales toppling buildings and monuments alike, its nine tails swishing around. The image almost seemed lifelike in a way, as if it could pop out of the scroll at any moment. I wonder. That aside, Kazumona began, bringing my attention back towards her, "The others are already here." "Where is Koto?" "Getting food," I replied. The blonde nodded her head. "I see, then it would be appropriate to set up the table, don't you agree?" I slightly inclined my head in reply, "I suppose." A small smile dawned her lips before she left the area, so I created a clone to help me set up the table before looking at my drawing and thought. The Ninetales. I couldn't help but slightly purse my lips. Unfortunately, there were a lot of things about those images that I simply didn't know, and I couldn't even interact with them without getting pulled away. In the end, the only option I had to get some answers was to level up my meditation to 100. I guess only time will tell. After Koto had come back from her grocery run, and had gotten my much-beloved octopus balls, the rest of the team came over, and we were currently enjoying a simple dinner. Now that we are all together. Tsukio started after swallowing his food. "Do any of you have any updates pertaining to the mission?" "Oh, come on," Viper proclaimed from his side of the table in exasperation. "Not everything has to be about the mission. If you don't learn how to relax, big guy, ladies will find you boring. See what I did there?" Everyone at the table. Bipa, do yourself a favor and stop talking. And you wonder why women would rather talk to a 7-year-old than you. Koto and Kazumona stated respectively, causing a dark cloud to form over his head as he wallowed in self-depression. Tsukio smiled lightly. Well, if none of you have anything Here, I said, tossing him a scroll. Lord Jiraiya sends his regards. Bor deftly caught it with a hand and unfurled it before scanning his eyes along the paper. What is it? My teacher asked, causing the man to place the scroll down on the table so that the rest could see it. They huddled around him to look at the information while I sat in my seat, enjoying my takoyaki. It's so good. Hey Yoro? I replied, my cheeks slightly bulging from the amount of food in my mouth. Koto looked at me ill-humoredly before replying, the kid that you asked Jiraiya to keep an eye on. I gulped down my food before replying, Shiranami, the one who hates us. Your emotion-sensing thing, right? Tsukio asked me, so I nodded in reply. People are always going to hate us, even if we aren't directly involved in their suffering. Kazumona began as she looked towards me. That can't be the only reason you decided to have an eye on him. I inclined my head in affirmation. If it was a normal member of the village, I wouldn't have bothered, but he is a high-ranking member who seems to loathe us. I'd rather not have him messing around with our mission, is the main reason. The blonde woman raised a brow, and the other one? Paranoia. There is something off about him. She looked at me for a moment. I'll take your word for it then, she said before returning to look back at the scroll. Yuri turned his gaze from the scroll before looking outside. I get the feeling that we won't be able to sleep tonight. I froze mid-step from stuffing my mouth with more takoyaki and turned to Koto, her expression turning serious as well. You just had to say that. The white-haired man chuckled uneasily. I couldn't have jinxed it that badly. My sensing capabilities are being obscured. It feels just like the time we got caught in the Kirigakure hiding in mist technique. I explained. I mean, it could be any . And it's spreading throughout the village. I can't detect ally or foe. Koto stated, giving a side glance towards Turtle. He gave a few more hollow chucked before Tsukio stated with a sigh, so we have enemy fog that's not only impeding our visibility but preventing you from utilizing your sensory capabilities? At Koto and my nod, he stood up. All right, monkey, tiger, and I will reinforce the wall's defense along with the Tsuchigomonin. Saying that, he slipped on his umbu gear before continuing, what will the rest of you do? Wolf was the first to reply as she slipped on her mask. I'll take care of the most vulnerable defense positions. Viper, Turtle, you'll come with me. Yoro and I will head over to the center of town and reinforce their defenses there, was my teacher's reply as she patted my head. Bor inclined his head before signaling to his partners, who replied in kind. With a subtle movement, they vanished in a swirl of leaves. Come you two, we have a job to do, Wolf said before vanishing, followed by Turtle and a slightly depressed Viper. Koto slipped on her mask before motioning to me, let's move Yoro. I nodded and was about to move, however, my body froze. An assault of emotions bombarded me, causing me to falter for a moment before I shook it off. What is it? Koto asked. I looked towards the direction of my clone. The clone I had left to spy on Shiranami chakra signature popped. And? I furrowed my brows. It transferred back a lot of negative emotions. I was a little caught off guard. Koto looked at me seriously. Empathy? I gave a nod in response. She furrowed her brows before shaking her head. Then let's quickly get a move on. Saying so, she vanished in a burst of speed, and I quickly followed behind her. A few minutes prior, third-person POV. Shiranami, why you really? Hato said, struggling to stand. However, his body felt as if it had been weighed down with tons of lead, making it difficult for him to move. Next to him, the clan leader was on his knees, sweat dripping from his brow as his body was surrounded by a rectangular prism-shaped purple barrier, his chakra being constantly siphoned away. On the ground were an unconscious Tunbi and a more than frightened Hotaru as she looked at the four individuals that were keeping the village leader in the purple barrier. Gyoja looked up from his kneeling position and gave Shiranami a hard look. Boy, what is the meaning of this? All my chakra detection traps have gone off across the village just as you finished your treacherous act. I don't find this a coincidence. What exactly have you wrought to this village? He squeezed out but grunted soon after as more of his stamina was sucked from his body. Shiranami gave the clan leader a long look before he cracked a barely noticeable smile. I'm simply doing what you wanted to do all along. Both Hato and Gyoja froze at that response as they understood what it entailed. The clan leader looked at Shiranami before sighing and shaking his head. However, even that movement proved somewhat strenuous. I don't know how you plan to accomplish that foolish goal, but I already know that if you go through with it, you'll just bring more tribulations upon our already weakened village. That's not even factoring in whether the plan you made will even work. Was that what you thought when you first created Fury? Shiranami asked with a dull smile, but didn't even let Gyoja reply before continuing. Did you actually care about the safety of the village when you began to prance around with your fancy new weapon of mass destruction? Why do you think we are even in this mess to begin with? Is it not because you grew blinded by rage at the loss of Hotaru's mother, your daughter, that you sought revenge and created this technique? You even named it Fury, but what do you have to show for it? Our enemies are still alive and kicking, and our small village is rapidly declining, and who do we have to thank for it? Who? Every question seemed to almost physically rip a hole in Gyoja's heart as his face grew paler with each one, though that might have just been from his chakra being drained. Shiranami stopped this instant. Hato yelled towards his son and tried to move. However, his body was completely unresponsive. Unless you have as much talent in Fuinjutsu as me or the old man over there, you won't be able to undo my seal. Shiranami stated before his smile turned crooked. But on the subject of you, father, he began. Ever since my mother died, you've just never been the same. Every day since I was 14, you've pushed me to be better, to be smarter, to be wiser, to be stronger, to be faster, to be more ruthless, to be. Shiranami paused and shook his head with a chuckle, and when I didn't live up to your expectations. He paused and chuckled to himself once more. You tortured me for 4 years to be better than you because you were too weak to save your wife, and instead of owning up to your weaknesses you projected your self-hatred onto me. Hato's expression changed multiple times before he closed his blurry eyes and clenched his teeth. Shiranami, I know what I did to you was wrong, but you are still dash. Shut up. Shiranami said with a tone that froze the words from coming out of Hato's mouth. Your paltry excuses are meaningless at this point. The only thing that matters now is. Saying that he looked towards Hotaru and smiled while walking towards her. And no. The girl said, frightened as she backed up and found herself against the wall. Her eyes widened as Shiranami's hand inched closer to her body. However, the worst result she had in mind never came. Hotaru felt a hand pat her head and gingerly opened her eyes to see Shiranami seemingly genuinely smiling at her. It's not fair, is it? Shiranami asked the girl with a sad smile. We both lost our mothers, and there isn't a thing we can do. Isn't that just unfair? The blonde, now somewhat less frightened, looked down before nodding slowly. Don't you want revenge? Hotaru's body stilled and she slowly turned her head towards her grandfather, whose body was almost as white as sheet at this point. It seemed like getting your chakra drained wasn't good for your health. Hotaru. Gyoja struggled to say but faltered as his body lacked the strength to support himself. Don't mind him, look at me. Shiranami said, forcing her gaze towards him. Don't you want to see the bad men who took away your mom disappear? Now while Hotaru was young, she wasn't stupid. Naive she may be, an idiot she was not, so she understood that Shiranami had other intentions in mind, but the thought of her mom and the people who took her away, the little blonde-haired girl found her head incline in a nearly imperceptible nod. Shiranami grinned widely, good because you're going to be the one to carry out the deed. As Hotaru's eyes widened at that statement, Shiranami rapidly moved his finger in the air. With his finger as the brush and the space in front of him as a canvas, he drew the kanji symbols for sleep in the air, and immediately, the kanji appeared on Hotaru's forehead. The entire process had occurred in such a minuscule time frame that Hotaru hadn't even been able to react as the floating kanji symbols had been drawn. Before she could even comprehend it, her eyes began to dull and in but a moment, her body collapsed onto Shiranami. Both Hato and Gyoja looked on in surprise, because while Hotaru had been unable to even notice what had been going on before she went unconscious, as more powerful and seasoned shinobi, Gyoja and Hato had managed to see what Shiranami had done in that little time frame. What? Are you surprised? Shiranami stated, looking at Gyoja, who was much more surprised about the technique than Hato had been. I call it the character bind technique, and it allows me to do many things with the symbols I write in the air. However, there had been a reason that Gyoja had been more surprised. What was evident as he muttered, "You." Shiranami smiled. "Don't look so frightened, old man. I'm not good enough at Fuinjutsu to materialize my chakra as seals without a solid surface. This is just a technique I developed to somewhat circumvent that, but it's not as fast nor efficient and not nearly as effective. If I tried using it on you, for example, you could probably break it in a fraction of a second, which, while good in battle, isn't effective for long-term effects. On those weaker than me, however," he stated, looking impassively at Hotaru, who was unconscious. Taking all that information in, Gyoja decided to worry about it for later, and as the most important question, "What do you plan to do?" Gyoja widened his eyes, however, when instead of answering, Shiranami pulled down the top of Hotaru's kimono, showcasing her back. Engraved upon the center of her back was what seemed to be a large gray dot, which caused unsightly veins to protrude from that spot across her back. Shiranami looked at it blandly. "Tell me, old man, what exactly were you planning to do by engraving fury upon your own granddaughter's back?" The clan leader could not even find the energy to respond as his body flopped to the floor in weakness and resignation. Hato too could only look on in powerlessness at the proceedings. "I suppose it doesn't really matter at this point," Shiranami stated before covering Hotaru up and laying her on the ground. He walked towards his father and brutally kicked him in the throat, causing him to cough intensely. "I probably shouldn't have done that, considering I need some answers from you, however, as you've always told me," the dark-haired boy said as he kneeled to his father's down form before concluding, "Suck it up, or you'll get it worse." Saying so, he grabbed his father's hair and yanked it so that he was facing up towards him. "Now then, the Tsuchigumo style, Forbidden Life technique release, creation of heaven and earth. Tell me, where is it? What do I have to explain my entire fucking plan to you?" Shiranami asked rhetorically in irritation. "I need the technique, and you will give it to me this instant, or your life is forfeit." It was at this moment that Shiranami's expression changed. "Tisk." Saying so, he slammed Hato's head to the ground and turned towards Gyoja. However, unbeknownst to every occupant in the room, there had been a brief smirk on his lips. "The leaf neen that you asked me to spy on with the dragon mural are about to move. If I don't get answers in the next 10 seconds, one of you two will die." Hato remained on the floor immobilized while Gyoja remained trapped in the purple barrier. He looked towards his granddaughter, torn on what to do. If he gave Shiranami what he wanted, his granddaughter would almost undoubtedly come to harm, but if not, then his life, or that of Hato, would be forfeit. "Will you keep her safe?" Gyoja asked in a plea. Shiranami looked at him impassively. "How the hell would I know? You're the one who made the technique. You should know better than anyone here." Gyoja's eyes widened as he seemed to get a grasp of what Shiranami was planning, but he grit his teeth and looked at the boy straight in his eye. "Fine, I'll tell you. Present time, Euro POV. Koto and I rapidly traversed the village, and in but a few moments, we arrived at the village leader's compound. "What do you feel?" Koto asked me as she cautiously looked ahead. I took a breath and closed my eyes before expanding my empathy. I was immediately bombarded with negative emotions, but as I was prepared, I was able to deal with it easily. A lot of pain, both physical and emotional, sorrow, resignation, just a lot of negativities. Koto nodded her head in understanding. "Then let's move." I held out my hand and stopped her from moving forward. "Hold on, something isn't quite right." She paused her movement before looking at me. "Enemy ambush?" Not sure, I stated before closing my eyes and focusing on my empathy. While the fog had spread across the village, it hadn't spread inside the buildings themselves, unless they had their windows open, so logically I should have been able to sense inside the buildings even if I couldn't sense around me. Unfortunately, there was a seal that was blocking my energy resonance from reaching the village leaders, so I was unable to do so. Luckily, there was nothing was blocking out my ability to sense emotions, so I could only tell how many people there were based on the different groups of emotions being displayed. I couldn't tell who specifically was displaying which emotion, unlike what I could do with my energy resonance. However, since I could still tell how many people were in a certain area just based on my emotion sensing abilities, I knew that something was wrong in this place the moment I had expanded my empathy range. From my observations this past week, I know that the clan leader only ever has a maximum of 5 individuals in his house at any time: him, Tunbi, Hato, Shiranami, and Hitaru. Saying so, I turned towards Koto before finishing my explanation. However, right now, I sense 7 different sets of emotions, meaning 7 individuals, 4 of which are hostile. It would be best to exercise caution. Though I couldn't see her expression behind her dove mask, I could feel her seriousness. Alright then, let's send a decoy. Nodding my head, I formed a reinforced shadow clone, and had it enter the house through the front door. Meanwhile, Koto hopped up to the roof of the house and waited for my signal. Third-person POV, you're a shadow clone. Alright, time to act like good faithful cannon fodder. The shadow clone thought as he entered the building. Immediately along the corridor, he saw the still forms of the village leader, Hato, and Tunbi. However, Shiranami and Hitaru were nowhere in sight. Besides that, now that he was actually inside the building, the clone could sense the chakra signatures of 4 individuals that were hiding in the shadows, but decided to feign ignorance for now. The worst that could happen would be getting dispelled. With that line of thought, Yura clone walked up towards Gyoja downformed and poked his body with his finger. I know you're alive. Even if someone is asleep, they still emanate emotions, and as far as I'm concerned, dead people don't have chakra. The village leader's body began to move before he shakily raised his head. Run. Yura clone raised his brow, but did not react as the 4 individuals he sensed earlier moved and surrounded him in a square formation. Infinite embrace. One of them yelled as they all slammed their palms on the ground. A purple barrier sprung up around Yoru, and immediately an immense pressure weighed down on him. My chakra is being drained. This is... Shiranami said that there would be some unwanted guests coming our way, but who would have thought that it would be just a child? Akaboshi stated as he looked at Yura clone's petite form. Oi, wait, you're telling me that this pipsqueak is a bona fide shinobi from the leaf? One of the other 4 individuals asked. A man named Chushin asked. He didn't wait for a reply before he continued, looking at Yura clone in deprecation. Not so tough now, huh, little turd? Being from the 5 great nations apparently means shit if even children can join their ranks. Yura just looked at him as if he was an idiot. Then again, he looks like one. Yura thought while looking at the man's thin, gaunt face and body, receding hairline, unkempt, near shoulder-length hair, and distinctive cleft chin. Perhaps somehow sensing the taunt in Yura clone's gaze behind his mask, Chushin grew a tick mark. Listen here, you little shit, I will dash. A laugh brought him out of his tirade. Tell me what's so funny, Benton? Chushin asked harshly towards the other member of the group, a very androgynous-looking man with brown eyes and black medium hair. His appearance was made even more sexually confusing with the pink lipstick he wore. You're getting so riled up from a child who can't be more than 8. Seriously, you're such a poor excuse for a man. The man spoke, yet his deep voice contrasted so awkwardly with his effeminate appearance that Chushin couldn't help but quip. You really sound strange whenever you open your mouth, don't you think, Nango? The last member of the group, a large man with long brown spiky hair tied in the back in a ponytail and small black eyes, didn't even reply. Always the killjoy. Chushin muttered. All right, enough. Akaboshi, the second in command of the group after Shiranami, stated. He looked down and brought himself eye level towards Euroclone. Tell me, where are the rest of your comrades? I know that you all rarely travel alone. Euroclone continued to remain silent. TSK. Let me make him talk. Chushin stated before he walked up and swiftly kicked the clone across the face. Euroclone's umbu mask flew off from the impact, making the upper half of his face visible as he still had the face mask on. Chushin froze, before his face warped in anger. You piece of shit. You dare to have a more handsome face than me? Saying so, he repeatedly stepped on the back of the reinforced clone's head, each impact causing the floorboard to crack. Stop. Akaboshi stated, yanking Chushin away. Nango, keep him in check. The burly man nodded and held Chushin in place, causing him to scream out in protest. Let go of me. Not only does he diss me, but he also has the balls to be better looking than me. Trust me, it's not even that hard. Benton stated with a smirk. Chushin looked at him with a glare. You have no right to talk, you trap. Trap? The feminine-looking man stated in anger before butting heads with Chushin. Euroclone looked at the group oddly and turned back towards the clan leader as if asking, are these really the guys you lost to? Gyoja's face was slightly red in shame, so the white-haired leaf shinobi decided not to bother and instead looked up towards the still fuming balding man before saying, weak. Chushin paused his tantrum, his face growing redder. What was that? I said you're weak. Euroclone clarified. You're so pathetically weak that I'm surprised you've even made it this far in life. Though I suppose sucking off everyone stronger than you is a good way of staying alive. Why you? The man stuttered, his face twisting in anger. Me. Euro replied tauntingly. Can you not speak? Or has that cock been shoved down your throat for so long that you forgot how? The air around the room's occupants stilled at the vulgarity being spewed from the young child's mouth. Chushin was at a loss for words as his mouth kept opening and closing yet no sound came out. Ignoring him, Euroclone looked up towards the still slightly shocked Akaboshi and stated, since you so stupidly ousted Shiranami as your gang leader, I'm assuming he planned this entire thing. Tell me, how did you know we were coming here and where is he now? Akaboshi snapped out of his dazed state before shaking his head. You're in no position to order us around, kid, but I don't mind telling you a thing or two about how we set up this ambush beforehand. Saying so, he gave Gyoja a look and smirked. In the building our oh so gracious village leader let your group stay in. There is a dragon mural hung up on the living room wall. You've seen it, haven't you? Euroclone thought about the memories his boss had and nodded his head. The boss had felt something odd about it then, but hadn't pursued it. It seemed like his instincts had been on point though. Akaboshi continued, as it turns out, our gracious village leader didn't actually trust the leaf as much as he said he had. The dragon mural can act as a spying device through the use of a technique, and Shiranami was charged with watching over your group during your stay. Euroclone raised a brow at that statement and looked towards the village leader, who had a difficult expression on his face. Euro didn't fault the man, after all, even though this village was small it was still a shinobi village, and he could understand keeping an eye on strangers. However, spying on his allies, taking note of their abilities, watching their every move. Akaboshi chuckled. Our village leader's faith in Konoha need not be extrapolated on much further. Euroclone sighed, what a troublesome situation. Thinking along those lines, he shrugged to himself, good thing I don't have to deal with it. And with that, he dispelled. Present time, Euro POV. My expression changed a few times as I received my clone's memories before I sighed and gave Koto a signal. Immediately she nodded and destroyed the roof of the building directly above where the four members had been, and in the same moment I charged my hands with lightning-natured chakra and fired out a beam of electricity through the wall. From my clone's memories, I knew precisely where the enemies were located, so I was not left surprised when I heard the surprised yells of the Shiranami's group. Without hesitation, I dashed into the building and slammed my foot against Chushin's face, after having quickly located him through his chakra signature. His body was removed from Nango's grasp and sent flying through the wall. Using this moment, I twisted my body in midair and slammed my foot into Nango's temple, causing his neck to snap to the side. His head impacted against a nearby wall, causing cracks to spread from the point of contact. "You damn brat!" Akaboshi yelled as he ran towards me, Benton in tow. However, before they could make it, I leaped back, just in time for my teacher to land on the area where I had previously been. Shocked at her sudden appearance, both the men froze for but a moment, which was more than enough time for Koto to slam her fist into Akaboshi's throat. The man choked and grabbed his neck in response while stepping backward, and my teacher capitalized on this moment as she stepped forward and threw her poison-coated senbon towards the enemy. Akaboshi was quick to recover as he quickly leaped away and deftly deflected the projectiles with a kunai. Landing on the ground, he placed his hands on the ground before channeling electricity through the floorboards and towards my teacher. With her incredible reflexes, Koto managed to throw down 8 chakra-infused kunai on the ground around her, causing the lightning to stray off its course and become conducted by the chakra-infused metal. "Damn it! Benton, get your ass over here and help me!" the man yelled at his teammate. But you know that I don't like hitting women." "Oh, for fuck's sake!" the man yelled as he took steps back from my approaching teacher. "Then get the fucking kid or something." The effeminate man gripped his fists before looking my way. However, I had not been idle during this time. I quickly threw a couple kunai his way, which he easily deflected with his own. However, as they were up in the air behind him, they puffed and transformed into shadow clones of me. The man didn't even get a chance to react before he was bombarded with a combination attack of my clone's wild water wave and lightning strike technique. The force of the attack bombarded him forwards towards me. "Wait," I thought, looking behind me and realizing that the village leader, Hato, and Tunbi were still incapacitated behind me. With the force and reach of this technique, they would no doubt suffer collateral damage, so I raised my hands and controlled my clone's combination technique and formed a sphere of electrified water with Benton still inside. "Benton! Damn it!" Akaboshi stated, seeing his comrade captured as he was. With a snarl, he dashed forward with a kunai in hand, yet with but a tilt of her head, Koto dodged the metal weapon and slammed a palm into his throat once more. Akaboshi gagged and fell back from the pain of the attack, allowing Koto to move on top of him and slam her fist into his nose, breaking it and causing his head to slam into the floorboard, cracking it. Using this opportunity, she quickly threw senbon at his form, and with his positioning, he was unable to move in time. He grunted from the pain, but was unable to move due to the paralytic toxin. It was at this moment that she suddenly threw needles towards my face, so I tilted my head, causing them to impact against a solid object right behind me before a thud sounded out. "Not bad, but you should have made sure he was either dead or unconscious," my teacher stated as she turned towards me and dusted herself off before pointing at Nango's paralyzed body behind me. "I was about to act, but you beat me to it," I said, twirling the kunai in my right hand that had been aimed at Nango's groin. I could sense some amusement from her at my response before she turned around and noted the village leader sitting up from the ground, his body still in pain. "What is going on in here? It's clear to me that those individuals weren't invited to your home, so how did they get in and what transpired to leave you in that state? You barely have any chakra left in your system," my teacher asked. Gyoja coughed twice before he looked at me and sighed. "My student's son, Shiranami, set up an ambush against me while my guard was down. Those 4," he stated, looking at the bodies of Nango and Akaboshi. "They trapped me in a barrier that prevented me from using my chakra while simultaneously draining it from me and keeping me paralyzed. They seem to have been a group specialized in combination techniques." Koto nodded her head at that information before asking the more important question. "Where is Shiranami now? Or better yet, where is he heading? Is there anyone else with him?" The village leader looked at me again before sighing. "Shiranami took my granddaughter away, and if I had to guess, he is probably heading towards Kirigakure." Koto narrowed her eyes before signaling to me, "I need a debriefing. Leave a clone here." I nodded and created a couple clones and had them tend to the wounded village leader and the unconscious Tunbi and Hato before Kodo asked once again, I don't suppose you know what route he is using? The man shook his head, I'm not sure, but he should know. He replied, looking at Benton, who was still trapped in my bubble of electrified water, and whose face was beginning to turn purple. Kodo gave me a look and I nodded before releasing my control over my technique. The bubble burst and the man trapped inside gasped before coughing heavily. He looked at Kodo and me heatedly and gripped his fists. Don't expect me to tell you any dash. I slammed my palm into his mouth and clamped it shut. Be quiet. Don't talk when not asked. If you hesitate to answer us, your comrades will die. If you think of attacking us, your comrades will die. If you lie to us, your comrades will die, and trust me, I can tell. Seeing and feeling the fear in his eyes, I looked at Kodo, who gave me an approving nod. I need the direction and destination. Kodo asked succinctly. With barely noticeable hesitation, he answered, and northeast towards the ruins of Yuzushio-Bakure. He plans to meet up with Kirinin there. As soon as he finished, Kodo threw her chakra-enhanced Senbon at his neck, causing his body to slump to the ground. What an odd turn of events. Kodo stated before shaking her head. I suppose your instincts were on point, squirrel. There was something odd about him. Gyoja's expression shifted. You knew there was something wrong with Shiranami, and you deemed it not important enough to tell me? I find it amusing how that works both ways. I stated, staring at the village leader straight in the eye. In any usual situation, he would probably be able to kill me quite effortlessly, but as of this moment, he was much too weak to do anything. What exactly was so important about your daughter that Shiranami decided to take her while leaving you and the rest here? I turned to look at the still unconscious forms of Tunbi and Hato before continuing. If he wanted a political hostage, then there would be no better individual to capture than you, yet he didn't, even though he definitely could have. How exactly do you explain that? The man remained silent and slightly hung his head as he didn't reply, while my teacher paid attention to the dialogue between us. I continued. Would you have believed me? I asked, causing him to falter. You apparently didn't trust us enough that you had him spy on our every move in the house you so graciously lent us, and look where that got us. I stated, causing his expression to become even more difficult. Wait, excuse me. Kodo asked as she looked between the two of us before focusing her face on Gyoja. I believe an explanation is warranted. The dragon head in our living room is a spy device. They have been watching our every move and our interactions, so I would be surprised if they have some idea of our abilities. Kodo paused and sighed. I'm going to really need that debriefing. Kodo stated before glancing at Gyoja sharply and shaking her head. She returned back towards me. Regardless, I'm going to have to salvage this mess somehow. In the meantime, Yoro, I'll have you chase after Shiranami. I tilted my head. Then what will you do? She gave one last look at the Tsuchigumo clan leader before creating a few clones, which body flickered soon after. I'll let the others know and have them meet up here with me while I get debriefed by your clone. I trust you will be fine on your own, and I know you can escape if things get rough. I nodded my head before disappearing in a body flicker. Third-person POV. Now then. Kodo stated before looking at Gyoja before looking at one of Yora's shadow clone. Tell me everything. Yoro POV. I dashed through the trees towards the direction that the effeminate man had told me. I knew he had been telling the truth due to my emotion-sensing abilities, so there was no hesitation in my step as I moved forward. My energy resonance ability was spread out to its maximum range, however. I narrowed my eyes as I took out a kunai and paused in my tracks for just a moment before throwing it ahead of me. Immediately, seals appeared on the sides of the trees that were on either side of the kunai, causing it to freeze in midair. Trap detection sure is handy. I thought before going around the trap and continuing forward, yet I couldn't help but think, that's the third one yet, but the way they are positioned. There were many ways that those traps could have been set up in order to more effectively ensnare an individual, yet they weren't. It was almost as if they weren't made to capture someone, but to lead them somewhere. A trap within a trap, trapception? I thought, keeping my vigilance on high alert as I again threw a kunai forward. A seal lit up from the ground, causing an intense flame to rise and melt the metal projectile. I continued moving forward for a while before I picked up 2 chakra signatures on the edge of my radar. They were moving very slowly relative to the average Jonin's speed, and one was significantly smaller than the other, but more importantly, they were familiar. Shiranami and Hotaru. Has he been leading me? Wait, no. I thought as I suddenly picked up 6 more chakra signatures, each of them familiar to me. Those are the same Kirigakure shinobi that I met around a week ago. With that thought in mind, I moved as quickly as I could in order to catch them before they moved off grid. Maybe they had been discussing something of importance beforehand, or maybe they had not yet come to an agreement, but I was able to catch up to them as their chakra signatures remained still. I stood a good distance away while hiding behind a tree and focused my hawk eyes and enhanced hearing at the 7 individuals, plus 1 unconscious hostage. You have everything we need? One of the Kiri-nin asked. Shiranami nodded before placing down a tied-up Hotaru. This would have gone much smoother had you succeeded in obtaining her the first time around. One of the other Kiri-nin picked her up before what seemed to be the captain replied, "We were ambushed by the leaf before we could even get close, so I can only assume they had a competent sensor." With that in mind, the most tactical option for us was to retreat since they had gotten the upper hand. Saying so, he signaled to one of his men, who nodded and stepped forward with a giant scroll in hand. "Wait," Shiranami stated, before pointing at the scroll, "I want to see the goods up front. I can't have you screwing me over and running away." The man with the scroll looked at his captain, who nodded his head, so the Kiri-nin opened up the scroll and ran his chakra through it before multiple puffs sounded out. I tried to focus even harder at the objects that had appeared and narrowed my eyes when I saw a pile of smaller scrolls on the ground in front of the Kiri-nin. Shiranami stepped forward as one of the scrolls fell off the pile and rolled towards him before picking it up and opening it. With his back turned towards me, I couldn't see his expression, but oddly enough, I also couldn't sense any form of satisfaction from him. Shiranami put the scroll down and checked a few others, yet each time his emotions remained calm and indifferent. The Fuinjutsu of the Uzumaki clan. The Kiri-umbu captain stated as he watched Shiranami. They'd been rotting in our village for years on end, with no one in Kirigakure skilled enough in the art to decipher them. He motioned to the scroll-wielding Kiri-umbu, who nodded and began to reseal the scrolls into the giant scroll before handing it to Shiranami. The umbu captain continued, "Since we have a powerful working seal to reference from," he began, turning his gaze towards Hotaru, "the higher-ups agreed to your proposal." I could detect certain smugness coming from Shiranami as he stated, "Yuzushiogakure, word has it that it took the combined might of 3 of the 5 great shinobi villages in order to destroy that one clan, and even then, you all suffered serious casualties. So much so that Konoha was easily able to capitalize on that opportunity, leading them to take control of the Second Great Shinobi War. That moment echoed the decline of the legitimacy of the 5 great nations, the aftershocks still being felt today. Wasn't it also for that reason that you became the weakest of the great villages due to your proximity to Yuzushiogakure? Why you?" The umbu captain held his hand out in order to prevent his subordinate's outburst. "We have what we want and he has what he wants, don't start anything here." I could sense that they were sending each other subtle messages as if deciding what to do next, however that still left me with a problem. What to do? I wasn't stupid enough to rush in there blindly, and while I could come up with something, time was ticking and whatever trap I could set up in this time frame would probably not work to my favor. Suddenly, my eye twitched and my expression changed as I held my stomach. "Don't tell me." I thought before something climbed up my throat and began to force itself out of my mouth. I could hold it in no longer and had to open my mouth before the red toad crawled out and began floating around me. I heaved a breath for a moment before wiping my mouth and glancing towards it. "I guess this is where I come in, huh?" the toad said before extending upwards and unfurling itself. It rolled out the scroll from its body and placed its webbed hands on the reverse summoning inscription. In a puff of smoke, a white-haired man appeared in front of me, fresh blood on his attire. He took a moment to take a look at his surroundings before he sighed, "Gamachi, this better be an emergency. Trust me, I'm sure you wouldn't want to miss this," the floating toad stated. Jiraiya turned around and faced me before giving me a light smile. "What's up, kid? Anything new?" I looked at the man before looking at the toad and sighing. "Over there," I said, pointing at the distance. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes as he watched both the Kirin and Shiranami converse before asking, "I'm going to need some info about what's going on." Long story short, the black-haired guy traded that little girl over to Kiri in exchange for Yuzushiogakure Fuinjutsu scrolls. As soon as I said that, the atmosphere around Jiraiya changed, but no sooner did the Kiri Umbu captain signal to his crew and vanish from the area. "Gamachi," Jiraiya stated, his voice firm, "you really outdid yourself this time." "Thank you. I just do what I always do." The toad saluted before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Jiraiya was about to move, but I told him, "The girl that the Kirin have is most likely related to our secondary mission." The Sannin paused before nodding his head. "I've been doing extensive research on that technique, so I'll take care of them, but you take care of the kid. You now have a tertiary mission." That said, he looked at me seriously. "Secure that scroll at all costs." Ping. Quest alert. Yuzushiogakure remnants. The Fuinjutsu of the Uzumaki was feared and renowned throughout the shinobi world to the point that 3 of the 5 great ninja villages banded together to destroy Yuzushiogakure, the home of the Uzumaki clan. Kiri was one of those 3, and now their spoils from that war lay in the hands of your target. Secure it at all costs. Reward, 150,000 EXP and Uzumaki Fuinjutsu scrolls. Failure, death and/or disappointing Jiraiya. I inclined my head before Jiraiya vanished in a burst of speed. I moved forward towards Shiranami, who had been standing there silently even though the Kirin had already left. I stayed up in the trees and waited for an opening. "I know you've been there since the beginning," the man stated as he held the giant scroll containing the smaller Uzumaki scrolls. "If you don't come out, you'll force my hand." "What does he dash?" My eyes widened as he tossed up the scroll and wrote, in midair, the kanji for fire. I had no idea what that entailed, but I knew that fire plus scroll equals bad. My body reacted and I shot out a stream of water from my mouth towards the symbol. However, "You should have gone for the scroll," Shiranami stated with a smile as he looked my way in the trees. It was then that I saw the kanji symbol appear on the scroll as it was in midair, and my gaze tightened. Crap, I thought, but before I could move, my danger sense warned me of an attack, and I saw Shiranami scribble in midair once more. I hurriedly jumped out in the open as the kanji symbol for ice appeared on the tree that I had been on, causing frost to spread from the symbol outwards. That means, I thought, looking at the scroll as it was in the air and noting that fire was beginning to spread on it. With little time to lose, I chopped at Shiranami with the edge of my palm, causing a sharp wave of electricity to travel towards him. While he dodged, I twisted my body in midair and blew out a stream of water towards the scroll, dousing the fire. I landed on the ground right below the scroll before gravity took hold, and it fell into my outstretched hands. I immediately put it in my inventory just as Shiranami found his footing and gave me an odd smile. "I'm sure you're tempted to simply escape, but if you do, it won't end well for the girl," the man stated. I looked at him carefully as I planned to simply leave regardless, but then he continued, "Oh, and if you don't, I might just make her go boom." My gaze tightened. So she does have fury on her, but make her explode? Can it be activated remotely? And without the user's consent? Many thoughts went on in my mind, but I decided to stay. With Jiraiya's level of strength, he would be able to catch up with the Kirin in little time, and considering the blast radius of fury was said to be capable of wiping out a city, he would get caught in the crossfire. As one of the Sannin, he was a valuable asset to the village, and it wouldn't do to have him killed when it could be easily prevented. Perhaps noting that I wasn't planning on moving, Shiranami smiled. I didn't actually expect that to work. Who knew that you Konoha were so compassionate? What, did the old man beg you to come to save his precious granddaughter, or something? I didn't reply. He thinks I'm staying for Hotaru. This meant that he hadn't known that Jiraiya was with me, which begged the question. How did you know I was here? He began to walk around the small clearing in careful steps, which I began to imitate in the opposite direction. The traps you set off along the way alerted me to your presence, and while I didn't know who specifically was following me, the only individuals who had known what route I was taking were the guys in my Magaki group. Considering I told them not to follow me under any circumstances. He paused his movements. Well, that could only mean that you Konoha must have successfully beaten them and gotten the information from them. The dragon mural? He smirked a little more. They must have told you about that, didn't they? He shook his head with a chuckle. Yeah, I knew you and your partner were heading my way when Kiri began to invade Tsuchigumo with the fog, so I let my group know in advance, but even then they couldn't stop the two of you. There was certain mirth to his tone as he concluded. I suppose the shinobi from the great ninja villages are of a different caliber after all. I sensed that there was something wrong here as I narrowed my eyes. He's too forthcoming. Is he hiding something or? There's no need to give me that look. Shiranami stated in amusement. I promise you that I'm telling the truth. I once more looked at him carefully. From the beginning of the conversation, I had slowly been invading his chakra system with my own chakra. Considering, however, that he was at a higher level and would also be able to break out if I acted too rashly, I decided to ask a question that had been on my mind. If you didn't want the Uzumaki scrolls and you didn't want fury, then what exactly is your purpose? Why bother kidnapping the village leader's granddaughter who is in possession of the technique and giving her to Kiri only to obtain a seal of scrolls that you promptly tried to burn? I thought you hated the 5 villages, yet you're giving them one of your most powerful weapons? Wouldn't you like to know? He said before raising his finger, causing me to increase my vigilance. He then curled his finger inwards towards himself. You can come and find out over my dead body. I calmly observed him, taking in his relaxed stance and lackadaisical attitude, and also looking at his stats. Name, Shiranami. Race, human. Level, LVL 65. HP, 51,000/51,000. CP, 26,000/26,000. STR, 500. VIT, 510. Dex, 500. Int, 600. WIS, 350. NG, 400. Yeah, this isn't going to work. I thought as I saw how much stronger he was than me. At that, I mentally placed 126 stat points in Street and VIT, and put 137 in DEX. I might have used them all up, but I would surpass him in those stats, and would have a greater shot at surviving. Shiranami smiled at me tauntingly. I focused my gaze. Immediately, I threw a powerful chakra-enhanced kunai at my target, who merely smirked in reply and tilted his head, causing the projectile to miss and deeply lodge itself in the tree behind him. With that complete, I clapped my hands together in a single seal and breathed in before shooting a ball of fire at my opponent. No sooner did water suddenly appear, as he used his unique technique to write out the kanji for water, in order to counteract my fireball technique. Steam appeared following the collision of our attacks and obscuring our view. However, I could easily detect his chakra. I gathered my chakra into a ball of electricity before firing it at the chakra signature I had detected. A small explosion to sound out, the shockwave clearing the steam around us. It was then that I widened my eyes as I saw multiple copies of Shiranami around me, each with an identical chakra signature. Shadow clones, no, not quite. I thought as I closed my eyes and spread out my empathy and found out that they had no emotions. Shadow clones each had a personality that mirrored their summoner's own and had emotions, but these clones didn't. All they had was an identical chakra signature to Shiranami. Over there, I thought, snapping my eyes open before clapping my hands to a single seal. Wind release, great breakthrough, and I switched to another hand seal in quick succession. Fire release, fireball jutsu. I took in a breath and molded my chakra into its fire and wind natures before combining them in my mouth and releasing a blast of blue flames. The force of the attack dispelled the Shiranami clones in my surroundings, while the main brunt of it traveled to a certain area at my 1 o'clock. I could sense a rapid buildup of chakra from that area as Shiranami moved quickly to react. He quickly released a torrent of water at my blue flames. However, the force of my attack vaporized his and continued onwards into the forest and up toward the sky. A devastating explosion sounded out across the forest. A figure jumped out of the flames and coughed as it landed on the ground while the fire began to spread around the forest. Shiranami looked me in the eye before dusting the scraps of the burnt parts of his clothes off. You could pinpoint my exact location despite them being identical copies of my chakra signature. You're not an ordinary sensor. I didn't let down my guard as I watched his every move. So he did figure out some of our abilities from spying on us for so long. With those thoughts, I moved to attack. However, Shiranami quickly drew the character split in midair and aimed it at the ground in front of me. My gaze tightened as I immediately jumped up, just as the ground split open beneath me. However, once more Shiranami rode in the air, and the character 4 Rock appeared in space. I was in midair and typically would not have been able to dodge. However, the kunai I had thrown earlier was attached to thin but durable metal ninja wire, which I used to pull myself out of the way of the attack. Ho! Shiranami stated before drawing slash in midair and causing blades of wind to shoot out towards me. I jumped off the tree and flipped before landing a good distance away in front of Shiranami. What a troublesome opponent! I thought as I gazed upon the man's smiling face. What's wrong? Shiranami stated, that weird smile ever visible on his face. If you don't come to me, I'll come to you. Saying so, he dashed forwards towards me while drawing explode. In midair, meanwhile, I quickly jumped to the side before he could complete it. The kanji appeared on the ground in the area I had just been in and caused an explosion that destroyed the surrounding area. The shockwave from the attack blew me off course and caused me to miss my landing as I skid across the dirt on my sides. Seeing this opportunity, Shiranami appeared in front of me. However, I expelled a stream of water from my mouth before he could go back on the offensive. Seeing this, he quickly wrote flames in midair, causing a wall of fire to appear in front of him and block my attack. Now, I thought as I flipped through 2 hand seals. Earth release, earth and stone bamboo shoot. Earth release, earth and stone bamboo shoot, active, LVL 38, 22.53%. Earth release, earth and stone bamboo shoot condenses the soil and rock in the area to sprout out in the form of 4 large spikes which attack the target from 4 separate directions. Maximum range, 50 meters. Damage, 600% ENGY. Additionally ignores 50% enemy durability. Cost, 1000 CP. From in front of me and in the 3 other cardinal directions around the flame wall, chakra-enhanced earthen spears sprouted from the ground and impaled the center of the flame wall. I narrowed my eyes, however, when instead of hearing the sound of flesh being torn, I felt Shiranami's chakra signature disappear from behind the flames. I immediately threw a few kunai to my right, causing them to impact the tree with a thump. I felt his chakra signature move once more, and so I again threw many more kunai into the tree lines and at the ground around me. Instantly, Shiranami appeared behind me, and I could feel his chakra molding. However, checkmate. I thought as I twitched my fingers, causing ninja wire to wrap around Shiranami and hold him in place. The kunai I had thrown all had metal ninja wire attached to them, which I had used to form a net around myself, which I could use to trap him. When did you? Shiranami began as he struggled to move. Since the beginning, I stated blandly while turning around and noting the kanji 4 to manipulate, disappearing from the air as he gripped his fist that had been inches away from my body. From the beginning, I had moved to trap him in a subtle genjutsu, so that he would not be able to see the net I had created around myself. I looked up to the sky, noting that thunderclouds were forming and that it was beginning to rain. I guess I didn't need that. I thought before turning back to Shiranami. I'll have you stay here. Immediately, my body froze as terrible foreboding feeling overwhelmed me, one which I came to soon understand as Shiranami opened the palm of his hand with a smile. Burn. I widened my eyes as a torrent of intense flames spewed out from his hand. Steam covered the battlefield once more as I jumped back from the assault. However, I didn't come out unharmed. Minus 8,135. Yorodon. HP 57537/65672. The left side of my body was covered with intense burns, and I could barely see out of my left eye. My thoughts, however, strayed elsewhere. I was so close. Shiranami stated as rain fell and the steam dispelled. I was hoping to melt your face off. That's too bad. I regarded him down carefully. He had the kanji 4 fire inscribed on his right palm. If it hadn't been for the fact that I could expel water techniques without hand seals, I most likely wouldn't have a face anymore. Oh? What's with that look? Shiranami stated with a smile before tilting his head. Is it because of these? He stated as he opened both his right and left palms, allowing me to see the kanji 4 fire and wind. What other ones does he have? I thought while subtly keeping my distance. To be honest, I didn't think I would have to go this far to beat you. Shiranami stated as lightning began to cover his frame. You should be grateful though. I now consider you a threat. With that said, he vanished. And in the next moment, I flew. My body was hurled back, my arms crossed against my chest as I had negated the brunt of the attack due to my danger sense. My body crashed through trees from the force of the impact, so I forced myself to turn and backflip before gliding to a halt on the ground. Minus 6,440. Yorodon. HP 51097/65672. However, before I could fully regain my bearings, a stream of intense white fire rushed towards me. In response, I hurriedly spread out my chakra and used the rain that was falling to create a wall of water. I jumped out of the steam that followed from the impact of the two techniques, but had to hastily go through a hand seal as a bolt of lightning flew my way. I didn't finish, however, as I was forced to block a powerful attack from above that sent me hurtling to the ground. I flipped and landed on all fours before quickly jumping back as my danger sense warned me once more. The area I had been at caved immensely from the force of the attack that just struck it. Interesting. Shiranami's voice sounded out as he appeared from the crater he had created. Whenever you've used a water or lightning style technique, you haven't used hand seals, but for the other elemental technique types, you have. He then smiled. It seems like my method is much more efficient. With that statement, he opened the palm of his hands and shot out a burst of fire and wind which combined to form white flames. I flipped through two hand seals and spewed out my blue flames to counter them, causing a wave of blue and white fire to ascend to the clouds. What to do? I thought as the flames died down, and I crossed my arms to block another attack. It was then that I noticed something. His chakra. I steeled my gaze and blocked another attack from the side, causing my bones to creak in protest. I flew back once more and applied the mystic palm technique to myself in order to boost my regen. It was short-lived as I took another attack, however, I could feel the difference this time around. He's getting weaker. I continued blocking each attack he threw at me while I utilized my healing abilities to keep myself alive. With each attack, I could sense growing frustration building up within him. Why won't you die? He yelled as he launched a lightning-coated punch to my crossed arms. I grunted as he impacted my bruised arms once more. However, I was able to safely land on the ground before jumping back a couple paces just as Shiranami landed in front of me. What's wrong? I asked, seeing the snarl on his face. You were so energetic earlier. Could it be that you have none left? I concluded. Tisk. He stated as some perspiration leaked from his body, though it was masked by the rain. The techniques he implants onto his body use up a lot more chakra than usual. I thought as I measured him carefully, my body's still healing. You can take a beating, I'll give you that. The man stated before lightly smiling. However, I'm not going to play games with you. I soon found out what he meant as an immense pressure weighed down on my body, more specifically, both my arms. I was barely able to stand from the force as it felt like hundreds of tons were weighing me down. I looked to my arms as I felt foreign chakra on it, and I widened my eyes as I saw the kanji 4 heavy was written all over them. What? Shiranami smiled. You didn't think I was just hitting you, did you? He stated, though I could sense his chakra dropping even faster than before. I didn't actually think you would still be alive after I used my inscriptions, but I would rather be safe than sorry. He finished as he looked down on me. I struggled to move, however, it was to no avail as the burden was too great for me to move effectively. I could only watch as Shiranami approached me with a smile before pulling me up and kneeing me in the gut. -5313. Yorodon. HP, 37857/65672. Ow. I thought before I felt my neck being grabbed. All you people from the 5 great villages are all the same. He stated before kneeing me once more. -5133. Yorodon. HP, 32724/65672. You step on us smaller, weaker and insignificant villages and ignore the consequences your actions have on us. He said before tossing me to the ground and stomping on my chest, causing me to cough as my ribs crack. -5277. Yorodon. HP, 27447/65672. He looked down at me apathetically. Do you even know why fury was even created in the first place? He asked rhetorically, pressing down on my ribs and causing their cracks to splinter. It was to avenge the grievances our clan had faced in the war that your so-called great villages started. That's why it was named Fury. Saying so, he removed his foot before kicking my body to the side before finishing, but in the end that pathetic old man decided to rely on the people he used to fight against, but I'm not him. He drew the character to manipulate, in midair before it appeared on my body, and I suddenly felt like I lost control of my functions. My body began to move without my volition before Shiranami took off the Umbu mask from my face. I will collapse the structure of the shinobi world, one hidden village at a time, starting with the village that gave purpose to the creation of Fury. Kirigakure. I looked at him for a moment before raising my head to the sky. It's still raining. Shiranami stated as he looked up before his eyes suddenly widened in remembrance as he saw the puddles of water all around us. Immediately large tentacles of water wrapped around Shiranami's legs, arms, torso, and neck before I released as much chakra from my core. The hold he had on my body began to slowly dissipate as he was not only too exhausted and occupied to keep it, but because I held much more chakra than he. With a little more exertion, I broke free of his technique. He looked at me in surprise. How dash? You were exerting a lot of chakra to bind me, so I just exerted more than you. I stated as my hands glowed a pale green as I began to heal my wounds. How can you have more chakra than me? You're a fucking child. Shiranami's yelled, his expression tight. He tried to struggle free of his bonds, however with each water tentacle that he broke, many more quickly took its place. It didn't help that he was incredibly exhausted from using his inscriptions, and had little energy left. Who knows? I said as my wounds began to close. I looked behind Shiranami at the result of my fire attack that I had used at the beginning of the match. I had used the energy from my combination attack to warm the atmosphere and create a powerful rising air current, which in turn generated the thunderclouds. The sky had already been overcast before, so I had merely sped up the process, and with the rain generated formed the condensed clouds, I had gained a much greater field advantage. Shiranami's head hung low before his shoulder trembled as he chuckled. His head snapped up towards me, and I could see his eye gleam in madness. My danger sense screamed at me to move. My body acted on instinct as I jumped back and crossed my arms simultaneously, noticing a giant glowing explode symbol on Shiranami's chest just before he detonated. His chakra spiked as an enormous wave of bright energy was released from his body. From my proximity to him, I could only watch as the energy consumed everything around him while also inching its way towards me. Immediately, time slowed down, or more accurately, my perception of time did. Accelerated analysis worked at full capacity as my brain began to process information at a rapid rate. Just as the destructive wave of energy began to sizzle the skin of my nose, I thought to myself, "ID create, empty." Immediately, my body dropped to the ground, causing me to groan. I looked up to the red cloudy sky as rain continued to fall on my muddied form. Rain appears in IDs too. And with that, I thought to myself once more, ID escape. Immediately, my body dropped once more as I fell into a crater, causing me to groan. Silence dominated the surroundings, with the only visible sound being the drip drop of the rain against my face, the ground in puddles. I sighed and shakily stood up before cleaning the mud off my face and body with some water manipulation. I tried to move my shoulder, however, I noted it was dislocated, so I popped it back in place. I began to heal myself before sighing. I almost died. The rush from the experience left my body, and I began to feel some pain from my limbs, but with Gamer's mind, I was able to mostly ignore it. If Koto finds out, she'll probably kill me, I thought while taking slow steps towards Shiranami's immobile body that lay at the center of the crater. I likewise looked around, noting that the area in a 100-meter radius around me was vaporized. The trees had been completely obliterated, with the rock and stone being shredded down to grain. Now, the only visible matter on the ground was the mud and Shiranami's burnt corpse. As I stood above him, I noted the obvious hole in his chest and looked at his body for a moment. What exactly was his goal? I thought before looking to my right just as Jiraiya landed in front of me with a girl in hand. There was now even more fresh blood on his attire, but I ignored it as I gazed up at him. I take it everything went all right with the retrieval. He nodded his head before taking out a scroll and handing it to me. These are the details of what I could glean from my research on the technique and. He looked at Hotaru, more specifically her back, before frowning the implant on her back. It's inactive now though, so no worries. I nodded my head. You really did a number on him, kid, Jiraiya stated as he looked at Shiranami's sorry state. I shook my head. He did it to himself. He tried to blow us both up as a last resort, but I was able to avoid it in time. So, are we done here? Jiraiya didn't spare the guy a second glance before he nodded. Yes, we are. Saying so, he gave me Hotaru. You take her back to the village, and in the meantime, I have to file a report to the Hokage about Kiri and, more importantly, the Uzumaki scrolls. You have them, do you not? I nodded my head and took out the giant scroll from my inventory with a little smoke show for effect. Jiraiya nodded his head before saying, keep them safe till you get back to the village. I know that someone there might have strong feelings about it. Seeing me incline my head, Jiraiya vanished in a swirl of leaves. Ping. Quest complete. Uzushio remnants. Reward, 150,000 EXP and Uzumaki Fuinjutsu scrolls. You have leveled up by 1. I swiped the message away and looked to the forest, noting that the rain had doused the forest fire that my earlier technique had created. With that, I hoisted Hotaru up in my shoulders and dashed through the forest back towards the village. Chapter 13. I quickly dashed through the trees back towards Tsuchigumo village, as I held an extra passenger in hand. In but a couple minutes of travel, I arrived at the front of the ruined door of the clan leader's house, and felt the chakra of Bor and the rest of the crew within. With that, I stepped into the house and made my way towards where I could sense everyone's chakra signature. I could hear the conversation going on behind the door of the living area as I approached it. Bor, you violated the trust that our Hokage placed in you and your village. And no Gyoja, it was the only way that I could ensure the safety of the village. Viper, bullshit. Tell that to the injured soldiers and civilians who suffered from Kiri's attack. If you wanted to better ensure the safety of your village, you should have worked with us, not against. Hato, hey, that's no way to talk to my village leader. Koto, didn't your son recently go rogue and kidnap said leader's granddaughter? There was an awkward silence at that statement from my teacher before I entered the room. I'm back. Heads snapped towards my sudden appearance, except for my teacher, who had most likely already sensed my chakra signature from a while away. Bor looked at me and the girl on my shoulders before stating, report. I gently placed Hataru down before replying. I went after Shiranami and retrieved the girl. Saying so, I paused before looking at Hato and Gyoja, noting the surprised look on their faces. What exactly had Shiranami been planning? Even after all the effort he went through, he ended up killing himself in the end for basically nothing. I'm quite curious. Gyoja's eyes were slightly widened as he gazed upon my form and Hataru's. Why, you're alive. I raised a brow. Did you expect me to die? He paused and stared at me for a moment before looking away with a sigh and gripping his fists. Kazumona looked at the man while idly cleaning her blade. You know something that you're not telling us. Saying so, she brought up the blade to the artificial lighting in the house and continued, it would be beneficial for your health to speak. You dash. Gyoja extended his hand, preventing Hato from speaking further. He looked towards Hataru for a moment before speaking. If my guess is right, from what I could gather while I was at his mercy, he most likely sought to destroy Water Country from within. Excuse me? My teacher asked, her eyes sharp. Once more Gyoja sighed before continuing, my granddaughter. I implanted the Kenjutsu Fury on her back. The air stilled. And why exactly did you do that? Bor asked unamused. For her protection. The clan leader replied. One day I would no longer cease to be. I hoped for her to be able to protect herself once the day came to pass and to continue my legacy. Some protection that was. Koto replied before asking, then? How does that fit in with destroying Kirigakure? Gyoja hesitated to answer for a moment, so I stepped in. I believe I might be able to answer that. With everyone's attention on me, I continued, when I was facing Shiranami, he mentioned remotely activating Fury on Hataru's back. It's important to note that at this time, he had already handed over possession of Hataru to a group of Kirigakure Umbu. Bor's eyes turned serious, you mean? I nodded. Most likely, his plan was to wait for the Kirigakure Umbu to bring Hataru within the walls of the village before activating Fury and destroying it from within. That's. My teacher said. Even Wolf's usually stoic expression turned grave at that. What a scheme. Though I have to ask, how were you able to bring her back if she had already been captured by Kiri? Hadn't you been preoccupied fighting the kid? It was a question I could sense had been on their mind ever since I explained that, so I replied simply, I had some help. I could sense the understanding in my teammate's gaze before I looked towards Gyoja, who had a difficult expression on his face. I can understand what his plan was and maybe even his motives, but if he went through all that trouble, why did he simply give up? The old man sighed. The Tsuchigumo style, Forbidden Life technique release, creation of heaven and earth. I tilted my head at the name of the technique. Likely sensing everyone's confusion and probably deciding not to hide anymore, Gyoja continued, it allows the user to remotely control the detonation of a user of Fury without their consent, but it has an additional function. Saying so, he looked straight at me, it can be set to go off at certain conditions the user sets, for example, death. My expression changed, if Jiraiya hadn't been able to inactivate the technique in time. I see. Bor said before standing up straight. At any rate, your granddaughter is back to you safely, and while it is unfortunate about your son. Tsukiya said, looking at Hato's difficult expression. There's nothing else we can really do. With that, he looked to the rest of us. Let's go. With that, he disappeared, everyone else following soon after. I looked at Hotaru, Hato, and Gyoja for a moment longer before body flickering away back towards my residential area. As soon as I arrived, I noticed that everyone had already begun to go their own way. I looked towards my teacher, who caught my gaze and smiled before heading towards her room. I suppose they are all exhausted, I thought before heading to the living room. I looked up to the dragon mural on the wall and squinted my eyes for a moment before pointing at it with my index finger and piercing through it with a beam of electricity. With that complete, I sat on the couch and entered my inventory before pulling out the schematics for Fury that Jiraiya had obtained. It's about time, I thought while looking at it. With this information in hand, I would be able to perfect the seal I had been working on, so I wasted no time in opening the scroll and reading through its contents. Definitely worth the effort. The aftermath of the Kiri attack against Tsuchigumo was a victory for them. However, in war, there was never truly a winner. The only real measurement of victory was by how little you lost compared to your opponents, and by that token, Tsuchigumo lost a relatively small amount compared to Kiri. The fog attack that had blocked Koto's and my sensory abilities seemed to have been more of a diversion for Shiranami to make his escape and collude with Kirigakure. In the end, he ended up dead with his plan foiled, and I brought back Hotaru to her grandfather. Now, a couple days had passed, and we currently stood at the entrance of the Tsuchigumo village. Around me was my group and in front of me was Jiraiya, who was having a conversation with the village leader. I eavesdropped with my enhanced hearing and found out that it was mainly Jiraiya politely telling the village leader about how the Hokage was not pleased with his conduct of spying on his ninjas, something about trust, etc., etc. Gyoja looked resigned before he handed Jiraiya a scroll, but before I could eavesdrop any further, I felt a tug at my sleeves. Glancing to my sides, I found a slightly flushed Hotaru who was gripping her fists tightly while looking down. "What is it?" I asked. Thank you," she said, bowing. She then straightened herself. "It's thanks to you that I'm still alive, and I watched her fiddle around for a moment before sighing, "Don't mind it. I was just doing my job." She paused before looking up at me with puffed cheeks and a sharp glare. "Humph," she stated as she turned away from me, leaving me confused. "I know what your intentions are, but I didn't even say anything bad." I decided to inwardly shrug and ignore it. Even if I could perfectly read a person's emotions, a woman's heart would forever be a mystery. As I delved deeper into those thoughts, I suddenly felt a soft sensation on my cheek, causing me to blink and turn to my side only to notice that Hotaru was already running away. I relaxed my gaze and stroked my cheek before shaking my head. Hee, look at you slaying at such a young age, Yoru. I'm so proud," Baipa stated as he shed mock tears. "Making girls twice your age swoon over you, TSK, you work too fast. Samiki would be so proud of you." Shark, I thought as Viper mentioned the individual who had jump-started my pursuit of a medical technique that was powerful enough to regrow limbs. And now, I can complete it. You should take notes from the kid. Bye. Maybe you'll be able to learn what makes women prefer him rather than you," Kazumona stated as she appeared behind Viper. A cloud of depression seemed to form over his head at the blunt statement, and he left me to bang his head on the village wall. "Humph," Wolf stated before crossing her arms and turning her gaze towards Jiraiya's conversation with the village leader. "Who would have thought that the old man had been spying on us? Tell me about it," Koto stated as she appeared behind me and added her own input. "It's a good thing we don't talk about anything compromising to the village when outside its walls, not that my team could anyway," she finished, pointing at her tongue which had the cursed tongue sealing on it as well. "I'm just glad that I don't have to stay in that room anymore," Turtle stated, appearing out of nowhere. "Who knows how else he's been spying on us? Maybe there were even devices in each individual room or something." The wind blew past us. They all shuddered. "If that's true, I should skin that old man myself," Kazumona stated while gripping her fists. "That's unnecessary," Bor stated as he appeared with his crew right behind him. I'm sure that Jiraiya is already expressing the displeasure that the Hokage felt. As soon as he said that, Jiraiya seemed to have finished his conversation and appeared before us before handing over the mission scroll to Bor. Now you guys can head off. I still have work to do, so I won't be joining you on your trip back home, but make sure to get back in one piece. Yes, sir. Bor stated and bowed slightly, which we all followed. All right then, let's move. The man said and jumped ahead with the rest of us following him soon after. Well done on your mission, the Hokage stated as he looked at us from across his desk. He continued. Now then, for your unofficial mission? The air got more serious as I pulled out the schematics of the technique that Jiraiya had drawn. It was based on the information he had stolen from the clan leader while my team had been there, in addition to the information he had gotten from the technique that had been engraved on Hataru's back. I had studied and memorized the schematics in its entirety, and was now fully confident in completing my skill, so I had no qualms in parting with the scroll. I handed the scroll over to the Hokage, who stored it elsewhere. Another one for the scroll of sealing. Now then, you are all dismissed, save for you, Yoru. Yes, Lord Hokage. They chorused before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. My teacher gave me a wink before she too went off. The atmosphere between the Hokage and I turned serious. I've heard that you've come into possession of some Uzumaki sealing techniques recorded in various scrolls. I nodded my head, causing a distant look to appear in the Hokage's eyes. He then shook his head, just make sure that they get returned to their rightful owner. Yes, Lord Hokage, I replied, causing the old man to smile. Good, now you are dismissed. Ping. Quest complete. The Power of Fury. Objective 1 reward, 300,000 EXP and 50,000 Rio. Objective 2 reward, 100,000 EXP and Fury schematics. You have leveled up by 1. You have leveled up by 1. You have leveled up by 1. Thank you, Lord Hokage, I said before walking out the room before vanishing. I arrived in front of the door to the Namikaze Uzumaki household, placed my palm to the side of the door frame and flared my chakra. The door clicked and opened, allowing me to enter the house just as Kushina came into view. Ah, Yoru, you've completed your mission, she said with a smile. I nodded. Yeah, it's actually something I would like to talk to you about, among other things. She raised a brow but signaled me in nonetheless. Well, come on in, make yourself at home. Thank you, I replied before stepping into the house and sitting down on the living room couch. Kushina came to the living room from the kitchen and placed down a cup of tea on the table in front of me before asking, well, I'm curious about what this is all about. Well, I began before pulling out a giant scroll from my storage seal. Kushina blinked. Oh. I nodded my head and unfurled the scroll before running my chakra through it. With some puffs, smoke began to fill the room. I had it open one of the smaller scrolls that had appeared. It would take a while to explain the circumstances of the matter, but long story, during my mission I came in between an exchange between my target and Kirigakure, with Kirigakure supplying this. Here, the clone gave the scroll to Kushina, who held it in her hand before her body shook. This is my clan's. I nodded my head. Kiri, as one of the 3 nations that attacked Uzushigakure, obtained some spoils of war, but it seemed like they never found any suitable way of using or deciphering it, so they used it as an exchange. I paused as I didn't get a reply before tilting my head at Kushina's emotions. You all dash. Before I could even complete that sentence, I was immediately wrapped in a tight hug and found my head in her bosom. I heard her sniffle and felt the tears fall onto my head as she whispered, thank you so much. I closed my eyes. There's no need to thank me. Hush you, she replied while holding me. After a moment she let go of me and wiped a tear from her eye. You have no idea how much this means to me. Obtaining a remnant of my clan's past, she continued, looking at the scrolls. Really, I can't thank you enough, she concluded, looking at me with a bright smile. I awkwardly scratched the back of my head. Kushina chuckled at my discomfort. Well, is there anything else you want to tell me? I thought for a moment before shaking my head. No, those were the main things. She accepted my reply before asking, well, now that you are done with your mission, you got any specific plans? Actually, I do. I said, causing her to look on in interest. I found the missing piece for the project I had been working on, so in a couple months or so, I should be done with my technique. She looked at me with a smile. I'm glad that your mini project is almost done, but you've never actually told me what it is for. Secret. She rolled her eyes. Fine, be that way. On that topic, Minato is almost done with his Fuinjutsu project, so maybe you two can celebrate together or something when you're done. I tilted my head. Almost done? I thought he had already completed that project about a year ago? The Flying Thunder God technique or something. Kushina sighed. Yeah. Here her expression turned irritable, but then he decided to jump into another project based on that technique. He says he should be done with it in a few months, so do with that information what you will. Thank you for letting me know. Kushina looked at me in amusement. Well, go on and do whatever it is you usually do. I'll be here if you need me. I nodded my head and dispelled my clone before vanishing in a body flicker. Months later. In the darkness, I could see the twinkling of lights in the distance. Here again. I said to myself as I floated in the void before closing my eyes. As soon as I opened them, however, instead of being closer to the stars, my body had actually moved further away. How did I know? Because now I could see even more twinkling stars. However, something caught my eye which made me furrow my brows. With my body now further away, I could now see a more complete picture of the amount of stars, and it then that I noticed that they formed an odd constellation. A large tree. Large might have been an understatement considering that I had to be this far away to get the full picture. As a matter of fact, how did distance even work here? Was I actually light years away from those stars? And if so, then that tree-like constellation must have been like the size of a galaxy. Before I could comprehend it any further, I was suddenly yanked away from the area. Congratulations! Meditation has leveled up by 1. Meditation, active, LVL 91, 48.67%. Meditation is a skill created through continuous inner focus. Meditation helps to sharpen focus and order thoughts, and it increases clarity of mind and awareness of the body. Passively increase INT by 182%. Passively increase WIS by 182%. Passively increase ENGY by 182%. HP and CP regeneration increase by 910% when active. Note, cannot be activated during combat. At higher levels, you are able to better sit still, and the rate of HP and CP regeneration increases. I opened my eyes before cracking my neck and looking in front of me. First those odd scenes and now a tree. I thought before shaking my head and focusing in front of me. I'm pretty much done. I stated in satisfaction as I gazed upon the culmination of my years of work. The notes that Jiraiya had given me about Fury had really been the finishing touches I needed to complete my seal. I had been able to use the blueprints of Fury to create a system of seals that would prevent natural energy from mixing with the user's chakra. The technique itself was amazing as Fury completely filtered out the natural energy from the bearer's chakra, preventing any sort of petrification to the user. Another issue had been matching the input of natural energy to the output of chakra that the user was using for their technique. The Fury schematics hadn't been too helpful in that regard, since the technique itself just gathered a bunch of natural energy with no true regulation. Fortunately, I had figured out that issue on my own over the past few months, so that had become a non-issue. With those thoughts, I looked at the 99.99% complete seal in front of me, noting the intricate layers of patterns that overlapped and complemented each other. Now time for the finishing touch. I thought before dipping my brush in ink before channeling my chakra through it and adding one more minute detail. Ping! Congratulations! Your seal has reached completion according to your specifications. What would you like to name it? Natural healing. Ping. The seal, natural healing, has reached completion. I stretched out my limbs before looking at my completed work. There's no better time than now, I thought before creating a clone in front of me. It nodded its head and, with the completed formula for the seal in mind, it placed its hand on my right shoulder and began to inscribe the formula for the technique onto my arm with its chakra. I was at a point in my Fuinjutsu mastery where I didn't need a brush to write down or draw seals, and could simply do it with my chakra and any solid surface. I would still need a brush and canvas to practice with and create new seals though. If I didn't perfect a seal on paper, and I simply inscribed it on my body with chakra, and there was a mistake in it, I would be kind of screwed. Seals formed by chakra did not come out so easily. With those thoughts in mind, lines and lines of script appeared all over my body originating from my clone's point of contact with my shoulder. The black lines of script suddenly stopped spreading before they rapidly converged to my shoulder and formed a unique image. With the seal completed, the clone dispelled, providing me images for how the inscribed seal looked on my shoulder. The difference between inscribing seals with just your chakra and creating them with a brush and scroll was that with the brush and scroll/paper, you were heavily limited in your design options since the seal had to follow the pre-established rules or laws of Fuinjutsu. Everything from the brush stroke to the amount of ink used had to be perfect. Each stroke had to mean something and any deviation could cause a huge failure. With just your chakra, however, you were able to bend and create the seal you wanted by molding your chakra into the correct form. However, you could make it take on whatever visual appearance you wanted, granted that you were good enough to do so. Of course, your chakra control and knowledge of Fuinjutsu had to be ridiculously high in order to accomplish this. With that in mind, I had essentially given myself a tattoo of the Penrose triangle on my shoulder. However, there were more designs to it to make it flare. Why the Penrose triangle? Because it's cool. With that, I decided to test out my technique to see if it would work well. And I know just where to go. Thinking along those lines, I stood up and dusted myself off before creating a hinge of a simple black sleeveless shirt to show off my new tattoo and a pair of black sweatpants. I checked myself out for a moment before exiting my apartment. Yep, I had gotten my own little place. I was getting older now and Koto had wanted me to start being more independent. So she pretty much kicked me out. I had plenty of money saved up from the missions I had undertaken since I was 6, and since I was deemed more than responsible enough to manage my finances, I had gotten access to my money in order to pay for this place. By the way, my apartment was literally next door to Koto's place. I mean, the landlady was sweet and the place was cheap and decent enough for my liking, so there was no reason why I wouldn't get it. I thought for a moment before sighing and taking off my Kakashi-esque face mask with a puff. I thought it had been cool for the first couple years, but now I had begun not to really care for it anymore. I suppose I grew out of it. With that said, I hopped up on the rooftops and traveled across the village until I came upon the Forest of Death. Without a moment's hesitation, I entered the place and jumped across the foliage before I came across a giant scorpion that was missing its tail and was on its last breath. King Scorpion. Level, 70. HP, 3000/65455. Bingo. I thought before I hopped down the tree and landed in front of the scorpion. The giant creature could not even muster the strength to move, so I approached it and placed my hand on its shell. You're in a lot of pain, aren't you? The scorpion barely shuddered in response, and I could see its health rapidly dropping. If you are lucky, this will bring you back to full health, and if not, then that's just your luck. Saying that, I activated my Mystic Palm technique, and in the same moment, the natural healing seal on my right shoulder glowed a dull green color. I felt strange but calming energy flow through my body, but I did nothing to it as my seal regulated the input of the energy to the output of my Mystic Palm technique. So this is natural energy, I thought as I felt it flow through my arm and augment the Mystic Palm technique. The pale green light of Mystic Palm turned dark green, and I could see the health of the scorpion quickly rising, but more importantly, "Look at that, your tail's growing back," I stated out loud. The creature began to stir as a new stinger formed from its empty socket. It started off as a baby stinger before it began to grow in size and reach a length of 5 meters. "It works perfectly," I thought as the scorpion stood up and waved its tail around before giving a deafening scorpion-like roar, whatever that sounded like. It turned to face me before turning away and walking back into the deeper parts of the forest. Ping! The combination of mystic palm technique and natural healing has formed a new skill. What would you like to name it? Mystical healing. Ping! Congratulations! You have created the skill, mystical healing. Mystical healing, active, LVL max. Mystical healing is a combination skill composed of the mystic palm technique and the natural healing seal. With this, not only does the user have an augmented healing ability, but they can also regrow limbs and lost body parts. It converts the user's chakra and natural energy into organic matter for the growth of the new tissue. 100x increase to HP regeneration rate, 10,000%. Cost varies based on the degree of the wound. Caution: the regrown limb might be petrified into stone depending on the level of the CC of the user. If the user has 95% CC, 5% of the regrown limb will turn to stone. I looked at the skill description carefully. I create new organic matter, which was expected, but otherwise, neat. I thought before reading through it once more. From the looks of it would be a terrible idea to have anyone with poor chakra control learn this skill. In the case that their chakra control was average, they could still heal someone and regrow their limbs, but the worse their CC was, the more the regrown limb would become stone. It wasn't all bad though, since the stone parts could simply be cut out and re-healed until it was negligible. Satisfied with my results, so I quickly exited the forest and headed towards Kushina's place. I arrived in front of the door to her house and flared my chakra before being allowed access. The door clicked open and I entered the building before calling out, "Anyone home?" I hear the pitter-patter of small footsteps approaching my position before a child came into view. She was around 2 years old with crimson hair and blue eyes, and she looked at me with a smile. "Yo Roo." My expression softened, "Mito." I kneeled down to her level, and she wobbled towards me before giving me a hug. I patted her head before asking, "Where's your mom or dad?" The little girl lifted her head and pointed behind her where Kushina was standing with her hands on her hips. "You shouldn't run like that, Mito. What if you fall and get hurt?" The girl dug her face into my shirt before I picked her up and placed her on my shoulders. Kushina sighed, "I swear, this kid." She shook her head before smiling at me. "And you always spoil her." "'Cause she's cute." Perhaps seeing my expression, Kushina shook her head with a smile before walking towards the kitchen. "Well, what brings you here?" I nodded and followed Kushina to the kitchen. "I finished it." She paused and raised a brow before continuing her food preparation. "Oh? Minato says that he's just about done with his project as well. So does this mean that you finally plan on telling me what type of seal it is, or whatever type of technique you created?" I nodded my head. I was planning on scheduling an appointment to meet the Hokage and tell him about my project, but I figured you should know first. Kushina chuckled before stating, "Then out with it." It's a seal to gather natural energy and use it to augment the traditional mystic palm technique and create a technique that could regrow limbs and other lost body parts. The significant part is that as long as you have sufficient chakra control and mastery of the mystic palm technique, you can use this skill, though there are some side dash. It was at this point that I finally noted that Kushina was staring at me wide-eyed as if I was some sort of alien. "What's wrong?" She pinched the bridge of her nose. "Did you just tell me that you created a technique that could regrow body parts and you are asking me what's wrong?" I blinked. "Yes." She gave me an odd look and pinched my cheeks. "I really want to know what goes on in this head of yours." She eventually stopped abusing my face and looked at me in seriousness. if what you created is true, and if the enemy ever finds out you exist, you can expect your name in the bingo book at the highest bounty. With so many of Konoha's soldiers inactive due to permanently debilitating injuries such as severed limbs, your ability could completely change the war. I know, which is why I hadn't told anyone about it until I was done. You are the first person to know. Kushina softened her expression before rubbing my head. Thanks for your trust in me, Yoru. Of course. I trust Yoru too. Mito yelled from on top of my head, causing Kushina to chuckle. Oh right. Kushina stated as she seemingly remembered something. Happy birthday. Happy birthday. I thought about that to myself. I'm 8 today. It was weird to me that 4 years had gone by just like that, almost like a dream. Kushina continued, I know that you don't really want anything for your birthday, but Minato said he had something prepared for you. If you want him, he should be out in the back in his little shed. I nodded. I'll keep that in mind, thank you. Of course. Kushina stated with a smile as she continued her cooking. In the meantime, I'll be prepping breakfast, so you can stay for that if you like. I slightly bowed. I'll be intruding on you. She rolled her eyes and waved me off. Yes, you and your formalities. Go off and do whatever, also. She gave me a bright smile. You look 10 times cooler without that mask on. I slightly flushed, but my darker skin must have prevented it from showing as Kushina didn't make fun of me for it. She would never miss that opportunity. With that, I exited the kitchen and headed for the back door before rolling my eye upwards towards Mito. You wanna go see your dad? Yes. Papa. A small smirk crept its way on my lips as I walked out to the backyard and approached what Kushina called the shed and what Minato called his lair. It was a small building that took up an area of around 400 feet too, and was guarded with a few seals that would repel foreign chakra signatures or prevent people from entering if the occupant was busy. I stepped in front of the door and raised my hand to knock on it, however. Come in. Minato's voice stated from within. I lowered my hand. Sorry for the intrusion. I stated while opening the door and entering the building. I took a cursory glance at the interior, admiring the various inscriptions and fuinjutsu formulas that littered the walls and floor. I looked forward towards Minato, whose hair was a mess, and who looked like he hadn't slept in days, yet I could sense an intense feeling of satisfaction emanating from his body. I'm finally done. He stated before standing up and stretching. He turned around and smiled. Ah, Yoru, you're here. I nodded my head. Papa. Ah, my adorable little Mito. Minato stated as he reached for his daughter, whose hands were outstretched towards him. What is it? Did you miss Daddy? The girl nodded her head rapidly before her face crinkled. Daddy smells. Minato's face twitched before he smiled and handed her back to me. I placed Mito on my shoulders and tried to sneak a peek behind Minato. The project you've been working on. Ah, that. He said as he turned around and picked up the paper where his fuinjutsu formula was drawn. It's based on the technique that the second Hokage created. He destroyed almost all records of it after quickly realizing its frightening potential. I raised a brow. And you decided to recreate it? Yep. He said, a sparkle in his eyes. I had already completed a previous version of it about a year or so ago, which you already know as the Flying Thunder God technique. He stated as he took out a tri-pronged kunai on which, on the handle, there was a formula. But this new technique is a derivative of that and is my own take of the second Hokage's original formula. He concluded, picking up the paper with the new formula he had been working on. I looked at it in speculation. Well, what does it do? Flying Thunder God, guiding thunder. Minato stated with a smile as he looked at his new technique blueprint. It's a space-time barrier technique that is capable of warping away anything that comes into contact with it. Saying so, he placed down the papers before looking at me. On that note, how's your project been coming along? I showed him my right shoulder. I completed it. Minato looked at the penrose triangle I had made my clone inscribe on my shoulder. you already implanted it on your shoulder? And with such an interesting design choice, you know that won't come off anytime soon, right? I inclined my head. Seals inscribed with chakra on a solid surface were almost impossible to remove. It also depended on what kind of seal as well. For example, my curse tongue eradication seal could actually be easily removed by Danzo if he so desired, since it wasn't such an intricate or complex seal. Regardless, I think it's cool. Minato gave me a wry smile. All right then. On that note though, he began, stroking his chin and looking at my shoulder in interest. What does it do? I know I told you to keep it to yourself, so you don't have to tell me if you don't dash. It can regrow lost body parts and heal basically anything, though I haven't even begun to test its limits, so I don't know what they are. I knew you should have kept it to yourself. Minato stated with a sigh. I get the feeling you told my wife as well. I nodded my head. And who else knows? I paused. No one yet, but I plan on letting the Hokage know, and so whoever he decides to tell. The only other person besides that who would know I created the technique would be one of my old comrades who kind of inspired me to make the technique. Minato thought for a moment. I suppose that's not too bad. He shook his head. Well, I'm sure that you'll be fine anyway. HN. Minato smiled before suddenly remembering. That's right. He said as he opened some storage seals on his desk and with a puff, took out an array of items. Happy birthday. There was an ever-present smile on his face. I raised a brow. Thanks for the water balloons and rubber balls, I guess. Puffed. Minato stated as he chuckled uncontrollably. Yoru, what's funny? Mito asked at Minato's antics. Who knows? Eventually, Minato stopped chuckling and looked at me. Ah, the look on your face, priceless. He stated, wiping away a tear. He then shook his head. I guarantee that you'll genuinely thank me later, for these are going to be your training tools for a new technique I developed some time ago. I said, looking at the items. Minato grinned. I already taught it to my teacher and Kakashi earlier, and learning comes in 3 steps to eventually create the Rasengan. He stated, giving me a water balloon. I looked at it intently. Now the technique requires rotation, power, and containment, and we'll work on them in that order. He stated as he watched me, Mito also watching my free hand intently. First, you must spin your chakra in multiple directions at once. It took a week for Jiraiya and Kakashi to get this down correctly, so don't worry if you don't dash. The water balloon burst. Done. Yoru. Mito stated as the water sprayed all over us. Minato looked on blankly. I see. He then coughed and schooled his expression. Well, it seems like you got this step down easily. You must be a natural. Good job. He stated while continuously nodding his head. The next step? All right. Minato stated as he gave me a rubber ball. The next step is power, and for this step, you have to increase the volume and density of the chakra you output. It took Jiraiya over a month and Kakashi even more so to get this part down. The rubber ball exploded. Done. Yoru. Mito stated as she covered her ears from the deafening sound. Minato looked at the scraps of rubber around the floor absent-mindedly. The final step? He snapped out of his daze and shakily reached for the regular air-filled balloon before handing it to me. The final step is sea containment. Why you have to combine the first 2 steps into a sea-contained sphere and prevent the balloon from popping or moving. Jiraiya and Kakashi dash. That balloon remained still as I felt my chakra form into a contained sphere of rotational energy. The balloon did not even move an inch as I completed the technique. Ping. Congratulations. You have learned Rasengan. Rasengan, active, LVL1, 50.00%. The Rasengan is a spinning ball of chakra formed and held in the palm of the user's hand, and does not require hand seals to perform. It does, however, require extremely refined chakra control, something that very few ninjas naturally possess. Once it is formed, it also does not require any additional chakra to sustain it, which means that there is no definite limit to how long the Rasengan can be maintained. Range requires physical contact. Damage 100% ENGY. Cost 3000 CP. It seemed as if Minato had regained his bearings as he gave me a light smile and patted my shoulder. It's okay if you don't get it the first time, Yoro, but I want you to at least try your best. We all learn from our failures, you know. I gave him an odd look. What are you talking about? I already completed the technique. He froze. What? I gave Mito the unharmed balloon and she gladly took it. With my right hand now free, I combined all the lessons that Minato had taught me into one. My chakra began to spiral and come together before a small ball of energy was formed that rotated in all directions. The ball grew to size before it covered my entire palm and a little more. I'm all set. Minato stood there, stock still as he looked at my Rasengan. I could feel him go through a variety of emotions before he hung his head as a cloud of depression encompassed him. I am going to get some air. Saying so, the trudged out of his lair, leaving me inside. Yoru, why is Papa sad? Who knows? I replied as I watched him leave. Well, whatever. I thought as I looked around his lair before my gaze landed upon his notes for the Flying Thunder God technique. Now, between Fuinjutsu experts there was an unspoken rule that you couldn't steal the original works of another master without his/her consent, or unless she was dead, especially if you were allies. Didn't mean I couldn't use it as a reference. With that, I quickly committed the information and notes Minato had on the Flying Thunder God technique to memory. Even though Kushina strictly forbade me from going anywhere near spacetime techniques for very sound reasons, I got the strange feeling that I would need this in the future. It was a nagging feeling, so I decided to listen to it since the worst that could happen would be that it came to pass. With that, I exited the shed and made sure to close it behind me before re-entering Minato and Kushina's main house. As I entered the kitchen, across the hall I could see Kushina with her hands on her hips, looking up the stairwell in exasperation. Minato! Why are you acting like this? First, you disappear into your shed for 2 days, and when you finally come back, you disappear into your room. What is going on? I don't want to talk about it. Kushina's eyes twitched. Now you listen here. Mama! Mito yelled. Kushina faltered before her expression softened slightly as she turned towards us. Mama's here, she stated as she walked forward and plucked Mito from my grasp, causing the little girl to giggle. Kushina smiles before her expression turned annoyed. What exactly is going on with that man? She turned towards me with narrowed eyes. You know something, don't you? He was teaching me a new technique as a birthday present, but after I successfully learned it, he became like that. There's definitely more to it than that, she stated as she looked at me skeptically before sighing. Well, whatever, have something to eat. I'll go bring my useless husband some food. I nodded my head as Kushina created a clone and had it carry food before they disappeared upstairs. I watched them leave before turning my gaze towards the food and taking a bowl of steamed rice and natto before taking another bowl of miso soup. I added some grilled fish to my menu with some salad before setting them down on the table. Thank you for the meal, I thought before digging in. Delicious. After a delicious meal at the Namikaze Uzumaki household, I made my way towards the Hokage's building after hopping across the rooftops of the village. In but a moment, I arrived at my destination and landed down on the floor in front of the building. I flashed the 2 guards my identification as they looked towards me, and they nodded their heads before stepping to the side, yet I noticed that their faces were slightly red. I tilted my head at the oddity and stepped into the building before making my way up to the Hokage's office before coming across the secretary. She must have heard my footsteps as she began to talk without looking up from her desk work. Welcome. If you are looking for an appointment with the Hokage, you will have to wait for a while. He is in a meeting right now. Is that so? I do have some important information for him though, I stated. The lady sighed. Listen here, she began as she looked up from her papers, but she paused as she saw me and her face began to turn red. I blinked. Are you all right? So cute. Oh. I thought. I had completely forgotten that I was actually this captivating without my face mask on. The lady coughed, trying to regain some form of professionalism, yet her face remained red. If what you say is true, then I suppose I can make an exception and let you in. Thanks. The lady nodded her head and bit her lips before standing up and opening the door. Please enter. I nodded and entered the room, the secretary closing the door behind me. Weird indeed, I thought before turning around and facing forwards. It was then that I noticed that the conference room was quiet as the visions of the 4 occupants concentrated their gazes towards me. I saw the Hokage, Danzo, and 2 other individuals who seemed to be around their age. Oh? Who's the adorable child Hirozen? I thought no one else was supposed to be here but us. The Hokage nodded. True, Hotaru, I had advised my secretary that we would be in a meeting for a while. Saying so, he turned towards me before blinking. Yoro? I nodded. The Hokage's cheeks were ever so dusted red as he coughed into his hand. You look different without your mask. Thank you. It was at this point that Danzo looked at me with his one eye. What is your purpose here, squirrel? I looked at the 2 new faces for a while and the Hokage have understood my glance as he stated, they are my advisors Koharu and Hamura. Whatever you would have told me would be known to them one way or another. I see. I stated before glancing at the Hokage. Lord Hokage, over the last few years I've been developing a new medical technique with my mastery of Fuinjutsu. Oh? Hamura stated as he looked at me with interest. A child at your age has mastery over such an abstruse form of jutsu. He strokes his beard. In war, the most useful techniques are the most destructive. What is it about your technique that would require you to obtain an audience with the Hokage itself? As everyone looked at me, I replied, I can use it to regenerate lost body parts and heal anyone to full health as long as they are still alive. The air stilled. Are you serious? The Hokage asked, his expression tainted in seriousness. I nodded my head in affirmation. Mouse. The Hokage yelled, causing multiple forms to drop down in front of him. Soundproof the room and bring me a disabled shinobi. Make sure they can't see. Yes, Lord Hokage. He stated before vanishing. Squirrel. Danzo stated as he looked at me with his one eye. Have you perfected it? I tested it this morning on a limbless animal in the forest of death, and it worked to my specifications. I replied. Koharu looked at me in interest. Requirements? Side effects? The main requirement would be for the user to have good enough chakra control, at least an 8.5/10, and must have high proficiency in the Mystic Palm technique. I began before continuing. As for the side effect, I looked at the Hokage. The seal absorbs natural energy to power the technique, and so in the case of regenerating limbs or healing large wounds, some parts of the target's wounds will turn to stone depending on how bad the user's chakra control is. So that's why you say they need good enough chakra control. Hamura muttered before asking. Can anyone learn it? Restrictions? I thought for a moment. That depends on what you mean by learn. If you are asking if anyone can create the technique, I would have to say that it probably won't be possible unless they are especially in Fuinjutsuism, and even then, they would need intimate knowledge on natural energy and its functions with years of practice. The man looked at me skeptically. Then how did you create it? I'm that good. I continued. If you are asking if anyone can use the technique, then yes, so long as I plant the formula for the seal I created on their person. There are no restrictions otherwise, aside from the ones I talked about earlier. As they ruminated my words, Mouse came back with an individual in hand. The Umbu carefully placed the man with short black hair on the ground in front of me. The man had a missing leg, but to make his situation more tragic, both his eyes were heavily scarred, making it so that he could not see. The Hokage looked at Mouse oddly. When I asked that you bring me a shinobi that couldn't see, I expected you to blindfold them, not search for a shinobi who was blind. If their eyes are healed, then what's the point of trying to keep my asset's identity safe? Mouse shuffled. Sorry, he said with a bow. Hiruzen waved him off. Don't mind it, good work. Thank you, Lord Hokage, he yelled before exiting the area. The Hokage looked forward towards the man who had been kneeling on the ground in silence. Tell me, what is your name? The man moved his head towards the Hokage from the sound of his voice. Imagaki Uchiha, an anagram of my ancestor's name, Kagami Uchiha, Lord Hokage. The old man nodded his head. Tell me, if you were to gain your legs and your sight back, what would you do? I could sense some form of very vague hope filling the man before it disappeared as he immediately replied, if by some chance I was to regain my ability to walk and see, I would. He looked up to the Hokage. My body was lost for this village, I would continue to serve it till I died. Good answer, the Hokage stated before continuing. Then, how would you like to regain the full functionality of your body? Hope once more filled the man and he pressed his head to the ground. I will serve this village for the rest of my life. The Hokage smiled before looking towards me and nodding his head. I walked towards the man before placing my hands on the man's back and activating my mystical healing ability. The natural energy was gathered and filtered by the natural healing seal before being used to augment my mystic palm technique. My hands glowed a dark green color as the wounds on the man's body began to heal. First starting with his eyes, the damaged tissue fell off before fresh new skin formed on his eyelids. His eyes, Kohara stated in wonder as the man's eyeballs began to reform. I imagine that they started off as small nuggets before growing and eventually stopping after they grew to normal-size eyeballs. His leg too, Hamura stated as he looked on in fascination. The Uchiha stump first split open, causing the man to grunt and blood to flow out, but no sooner did the limb begin to reform. First, it slowly grew out new bones which grew in size until they became as large as an adult leg. Next, was the muscle that wrapped around the bone and became knit together tightly. Finally, skin reformed on the leg, providing the Uchiha with a completely regrown limb. Not only that, the leg skin was smooth and without blemish as if it was a newborn's. Furthermore, all the skin on the man's body seemed to glow as the dead skin fell and fresh skin regrew. The man shakily stood up before inspecting his hands. I can see. He then began to move his legs and my legs. Fascinating, Danzo stated as he inspected the man before asking, how do you feel? The man froze as he looked around, noting the vision of the four people in front of him before he stood in a respectful manner. My mobility has returned and so has my vision, furthermore I couldn't see what he had done as I stood behind him, but Danzo supplied me with an answer, your Sharingan. Yes, my eyes are almost as good, no, even a little better than before. With that, he bowed deeply. Thank you, elders, for restoring this lowly one's ability to walk and see. I promise I will serve this village for the rest of my days. Stand. The Hokage stated, we are not the ones you should be bowing to. I know, however, without your instruction I would still be in the hospital, wasting my days away. Saying so, he offered another short bow. I will not turn as to not compromise your identity, but I sincerely thank you for healing me. I nodded my head and patted his back. If I spoke, he would easily figure that I was a child, and while there were only about 18 people in this world who truly knew about my existence, it would be best to keep it that way. You are free to go, however. Hiruzen began, a sharp glint in his eyes. What happened here today is classified as an S-rank secret. If someone were to ask how you fully recovered, you are at most to reply that it was a newly developed experimental ninjutsu. Are we clear? Yes, Lord Hokage, the man stated before bowing once more. Hiruzen nodded. Mouse, escort Imagaki back. The Umbu with the mouse mask dropped down and nodded before placing a hand on the Uchiha's shoulder and vanishing from view. Yoru, the Hokage stated, causing me to stand at attention. For now, I want you to keep that ability a secret for a while. I want you to demonstrate it to a few individuals so that they can appraise it. All right, Lord Hokage. He nodded. Good, you are dismissed. And so, with a short bow, I left the room. Third-person POV. Kohara waited until Yoru left the room before commenting. What an interesting child. I'm quite interested to know about his origin. Seeing Hamura nod in agreement, Danzo explained. From what I know, he is an orphan who was scouted by one of my previously inactive shinobi at the time. He showed high intellect and an incredible aptitude for chakra manipulation. Hamura raised a brow. Is that all? Danzo paused at the question. Seeing this, the Hokage asked, Danzo? The man in question closed his lone eye as he seemed to figure out how to explain before stating. 5 years ago, on this exact day, one of our shinobi returned to the village with a child in hand who seemed to be about 3 years of age. She had unfortunately lost her team and was badly injured, so she had decided to leave the child in one of our orphanages in order to grieve and heal. He paused before continuing. Around that time, I had approached her with the option of serving her village by using her exceptional sensory capabilities to protect our borders. She accepted but decided to work in the orphanage where she had left the child as she felt marginally responsible for him. However, she began to realize something was wrong as he could not walk, talk, or do anything on his own. The child was like a blank slate that could only perform reflexive actions that even infants could perform, such as breathing, blinking, sucking, among others. Hiruzen put on a thoughtful expression. Odd. Where exactly had she found him, if I may ask? Near the outskirts of the village, alone, with only leaves as covering. At least that was what I was told. Danzo answered. There was nothing discernible about him save for his skin color and white hair, possibly indicating a connection to someone in Kumo, but even then, we couldn't be sure. Kohara began with a thoughtful look. A child like that would have been thought to have some sort of terrible illness. You wouldn't expect them to live for long, especially on their own. That's precisely what the doctors had believed when they checked him, but he turned out fine. With about a year, that same shinobi who had brought him to the village was able to teach him how to read, walk and talk. Strangely enough though, he seems to have no recollection of that time, according to her. Danzo supplied. Interesting, very interesting. Hamura stated before chuckling. Well, while he seems to have no past, he definitely has a future with his intelligence. The Hokage nodded. That's true. I look forward to what he will do in the future. With everyone giving murmurs of agreement, Hiruzen continued with a serious expression. Now then, let's get back to the other topic at hand. Saying so caused the air in the room to intensify. Tell me, Danzo, are your sources truly accurate? The man inclined his head. I cross-checked with Jiraiya's intelligence network, and there's no doubt. So, it's come to this, huh? Hiruzen stated calmly. Danzo nodded. Iwagakure is going to move its Jinchuriki. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.